but I'm going to have to answer for that someday. I'm going to go before my maker, and there's going to come a day where I get called into and answered for all of my deeds, and I'm going to have to settle it in the afterlife. Then I'm going to treat you differently. On the other hand, if I've convinced myself, hey, I can fool you and I can get away with it, then, and I don't have to answer for it eternally, then who really cares? Hello and welcome to Reasoning Through the Bible. My name's Glenn and this is Steve. We are in the book of Exodus, so if you have your Bibles, you might want to open them to Exodus chapter 22. And we're at a part of the book, Steve, where it changes to a lot of rules. And this is the law of Moses, so now we are going to be waist deep in the actual law of Moses. But at this point in the story, maybe time for just a check on where we are in the flow of the book.
Yeah. So what is happening is that they have come out of Egypt and they have made their way down to Mount Sinai, which is the same mount where the burning bush was, where Moses was commissioned by God to go into Egypt and free his people. They've had several things that have happened on the way, miracles that God has shown them in regards to water and food. And they're still getting the manna and the bread and the quail, the meat every day as they're here, but they're camped outside of Mount Sinai. And Moses is going up on the mountain, is actually up on the mountain as he receives this law from God. He's received the 10 Commandments. We've gone through all of those. And then right after that, he starts going into other areas of very specific things. The first part dealt a lot with slavery. We did 3 separate sessions on the part of slavery. And what was discussed there, we ask our listeners and our viewers to go watch those 3 if they haven't already to learn about that. And now as we get into chapter 22, we're getting into more of the specific details of property rights, what to do if certain situations happen. The last thing is just that, again, this is God giving all of these instructions to Israel as a nation so that they can live and function as a nation amongst the other nations who are not believers in Yahweh. For them to be set apart, and this is one way for them to be set apart, is through these rules and regulations that Yahweh is giving them very specifically.
And very specific is a good word, because starting here and going really through the whole rest of the book of Exodus is a list of laws and rules and things like that. I feel like I'm reading these chapters. I feel like I'm down at the law library reading through the law books, because that's what the rest of the book is. Perhaps there's people in the world that just enjoy reading through law books, but when you first think about this, you think, oh, how could it be valuable and practical for us? But there's actually a great deal of good teaching that we can draw out of this, a lot of very good moral instructions that can come out of these laws, and it gives us a peek into the character of God and how to get along with our fellow man. Let's go ahead and pull it up. Again, if you have your Bibles, turn to Exodus chapter 22. This starting here, it's all commands about the Mosaic law, and verse 1 says, "If a man steals an ox or a sheep and slaughters it or sells it, he shall pay 5 oxen for the ox and 4 sheep for the sheep." Now, Steve, is there a practical application on this today? Why should we be concerned about oxen and sheep when I don't even own any oxen or sheep?
Well, it's a good thing to note that as we go through here and study, there's a lot of the scripture that's written for us, but not to us. You and I are not Jewish of Jewish descent. A lot of these things don't have a meaning to us, and they're not specifically to us, but we can get meaning out of them. While we go in here and look at this also was given at this specific point in time in the life of Israel. So this did have specific meaning at that point in time. That's what they lived off of, was livestock, and of course they're nomadic, so they haven't set up shop where they can, they're not an agricultural society yet. They'll get that way whenever they get in settled in their land. But yeah, there's oxen, sheep, and livestock. That's mainly what they're living off of out here. Beasts of burden, way that they move things around. So it's kind of important to them.
Correct. This was agricultural economy. And so this was their business. And so again, look at verse 1. If somebody steals something, what it's saying is that they have to pay back more than they stole. They have to pay back more than they stole, either 4 or 5 times, depending on the value of the animal. So here's a question, Steve. Why would God set it up to where a thief has to pay back more than what they've stolen?
A deterrent. Unfortunately, we're always going to have thieves in any society that we live in. God is setting this up as far as to make at least the thieves think twice before they do steal the livestock, that it's going to cost them when they get caught.
And so this tells us some things about God's character here and God's principles. If a thief is required to pay back much more than what they've stolen, it's going to make people think twice about stealing things. And in our day, we have legislators and judges that say, okay, well, people can steal things and not get punished. And what does that do? People just increase the amount of stealing. Whereas if we were like God said here, okay, every time you steal something, you got to pay back 4 and 5 times as much, and we're going to make sure you do. That's going to be a great deterrent.
Mentioning that our society, there's things in our society today where the governments have said, if you steal up to a certain amount, under that amount, you get a little ticket. Above that, you might get prosecuted and get some jail time. So guess what? The thieves have gotten to a point where they only steal up a little bit less than that amount, because they know that if they do get caught, all they're going to get is a ticket. They're not going to get any type of punishment as far as jail or anything else like that.
And then they go down to the next store and steal up to that exact amount again, and they make their living stealing, and the businesses go out of business. And that's one of the reasons our society's having so much troubles. But let's go ahead and look at the next ones. The next couple of verses talk about, verses 2 and 3, talk about if a thief steals livestock at night and the owner kills him, then the owner's innocent. However, if the owner kills the thief during the day, the owner can be guilty and must go to trial to see whether it was justified or whether it was murder. Here's a question. Why would there be a distinction? What's there different about a thief at night that I could justifiably kill this thief, whereas if it's during the day, I might have to go before a judge that would decide?
Well, at nighttime, all the family is at home. Any thief that's going to go into somebody else's property at nighttime knows and has the expectation that the owners are going to be there, the people that live there that are going to be there. And it's not just the father himself, but it's also the wife, the children, and it's his family that are there that are put in danger. Versus daytime, there might not be an expectation that there would be somebody there of the family at the residence. They might be out in the field doing different items of work or whatever it might be. I think the major distinction is, one is the thief knows that the family's going to be there and they're put in danger, versus during the daytime, the family's not necessarily expected to be there.
And plus, I would submit that not only that, which I agree with what you said, but during the day, the livestock are generally going to be in a field or outside of where the people would be. And you could see the thief and approach them and deal with them. And you have a little bit more intelligent way of dealing with the thief than at night, sneaking around. Oftentimes they would bring the animals in closer to where the people were sleeping during the night to make sure that the predators didn't get them. And so it's just a different situation at night. So what this does, though, is it gives us an additional principle of people being able to protect themselves against attackers, while at the same time giving rights to people that are accused of a crime. Because if it's at night, this is viewed as a threat, somebody sneaking around at night close to where my family is. I have the right to defend my family by taking the other person's life. On the other hand, during the day, it presumes I saw this person at a distance, I approached them, we had some sort of interaction, and then I killed them. Then, well, this needs to go before a judge to decide. This brings up these principles of both protecting the individual property and the individual being able to protect their family, even to the point of killing an attacker. But at the same time, if there's a situation that there's an issue, then, okay, the accused have rights.
So, Glenn, it sounds like to me that you're saying that these laws, these rules here are well thought out. They're not just randomly thrown out, that there's some intricacies and purposes behind them.
Oh, yeah. And that's why there's such a wonderful Mosaic law. This law really was very well thought through by divine mind. It's a great way of dealing with people. And the greater cultures and societies of the world have built their law systems on this law of Moses.
Yes, and we call it the law of Moses, but who is it that's giving these instructions to Moses?
Well, it's the Lord God.
Right. Yeah.
Now, moving on, in the next verse here, again in verse 3, it also tells us, it talks about if the person is poor. At the end of verse 3, let's just read it. If the sun has risen on him, this is the thief, there will be blood guiltiness on his account. In other words, the owner was guilty. He shall surely make restitution. So this restitution is a making it right, of paying a fee to make it right. So that's one of the concepts that's going to be permeating this law. It talks about the person being so poor that he owes nothing, then he should be sold for his theft. So what that's saying is that you have a thief that's come in and stolen something, and he now owes 4 and 5 times the amount to the owner that he stole from. Well, what happens if he's so poor that he can't pay that? What it's saying is that, again, like we said in the topics we did on slavery, the debt has to get paid. We don't just say, oh, you're poor, so you don't have to make the restitution. No, you're going to have to go work for this, or you get sold as a bond servant in order to make this money back.
And the terms here of everything that we went through in those 3 sessions, this is an indentured servitude. He's going to go to work. He's going to be indentured to whoever the person that he goes to work it out, whatever the debt amount is owed. Then he's free. Number one. Number two is if it surpasses 6 years, he's going to go free. So all of the rules that went into it that we previously talked about in chapter 21 are all still going to apply to this person who is, as it says here, sold, but put into an indentured servitude type of thing in order to work off this debt of theft that he had.
Right. And so this thief knew this going in, is that I get caught with this, I'm going to end up having to go work for somebody to work this off, because I will have to pay 4 and 5 times depending on what I stole. Again, you're not permanently the rest of your life into this. It's until you pay back the 4 and 5 times what you stole. That's the protection of both the owner and the accused thief, to make sure everything's fair. Our society says, oh, somebody stole from you, you're just out of luck. God would say that's immoral, to let somebody that's just has their stuff stolen, you're just out of luck. No, that person's going to have to pay it back. And even if they have to work for you or something like that. So moving on, verse 5, a man has to make restitution even if his livestock eat the neighbor's feed. So if my livestock go over and eat the grass of the neighbor, then I have to pay back, even if it's something as small as a day or so of cattle feed. So here's a question, Steve. Does God care about stealing small things?
Yes. That's what we were talking about, is that all of these are very well thought out and reasoned out. They're not just something that's been randomly thrown out there.
And he goes into, in this law, many different scenarios. There's one in here about what happens if I start a fire and it burns up the neighbor's property, the neighbor's cattle feed or the neighbor's whatever, then now I'm responsible for that damage. This brings in the concept, it's a legal concept called negligence. If I'm so negligent with doing something that it causes damage to somebody else, I should be responsible for that. These were legal issues that all way back here in the law of Moses, over 3,000 years ago, that are very practical, very moral way of doing business. You can't just say, oh, it was a mistake, so just because I burned down all your cattle feed for the next year, and now you don't have any food, that cost you, a large sum of money, so too bad, so sad. No, I have to give you restitution. I have to make that up. It keeps going. Let's read the next one. Verses 7 through 9 in there, it talks about how a person gives valuables to a neighbor and then they disappear. Then they must go before a judge or judges to determine the restitution that the owner has to pay. And especially look at verse 9. This is for, it says in there, every breach of trust. Pay attention to that. Any breach of trust, anytime one person has caused a damage or lost something or caused some issue with somebody else, then they have to go before a judge. And this gets into not only what it's talking about here, it covers a wide variety of possible circumstances that aren't specifically spelled out. Any breach of trust where two people interact with each other and one of them says, wait a minute, I've been wronged, then they can go before a judge and get the matter solved. Back to our concept on slavery, simply because there's so many accusations that people make against the Bible and slavery. This includes free men or slaves. Again, look at verse 7 and 9. If a man, if the thief, verse 9, for every breach of trust, even a slave, if they say, look, I've been bruised, my master treated me wrongly, I was only supposed to pay off X amount of time, and now they're holding me to Y, they can go before a judge and deal with it. And so it sets up an entire legal system where people can get their grievances resolved. And Steve, to me, that just sets a wonderful moral example for the rest of society. Wouldn't you think?
Yes, and everybody, and all of the Israelites in the nation, they know this. This is one law that's for all of them. So they're all going to be informed of this. They all know that they're going to be under one. There's not two-tiered systems. They don't have kings or royalty. They know that everybody's equal and everybody's going to have the same punishment or at least abide by the same rules that are laid out.
And this even applies to bond slaves. If you can't steal from a bond slave. So anyone, it just says if a man. So then let's look down at verse 10 and 11. Verse 10 and 11, if a man loans his neighbor livestock and it dies or runs away, then the man will ask the neighbor to swear before the Lord about the truth of what happened. Now, I submit, Steve, this is a great law if the people respect the Lord.
Exactly.
If the people have some sort of a respect for the Lord, then we could both get together and say, I am telling the truth in front of the Lord here that this is actually what happened.
That's correct. But to your point, if they don't have any regard for the Lord or God, then they might feel free to lie. But there's going to be punishment for that.
Now, where I bring this up is simply because any law in any society is only as good as the moral character of the people that keep it, or the moral character of the society. If the moral character of the society is upstanding and has a fear of God and has a fear of both God and man, then I'm going to do right simply because I don't want to have to, okay, I might be able to fool you, but I'm going to have to answer for that someday. I'm going to go before my maker, and there's going to come a day where I get called into and answered for all of my deeds, and I'm going to have to settle it in the afterlife. Then I'm going to treat you differently. On the other hand, if I've convinced myself, hey, I can fool you and I can get away with it, then, and I don't have to answer for it eternally, then who really cares?
Right. And you mentioned a while ago that society's laws are built off of this Mosaic law. This is directly where at least the America, they've changed it now, but it used to be when a witness went into the witness stand, the bailiff would read to them, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? And the witness would say, I do. This is where this directly comes from. Now, there are penalties if the witness perjures themselves, meaning that they don't tell the truth. there's going to be a penalty, but of course they have to be found out that they did not tell the truth, and there would be a perjury. But the point of that oath at the beginning of their testimony was that they swore, hey, I swore to tell the truth and nothing but the truth in front of God. And that at some point in time, I am going to be judged for that. It's not just this court in this country that I'm going to have to deal with. I'm also going to have to deal with God at some point.
And to take that and kind of run with it, Steve, you brought up some of the laws here. In the United States, we have a Constitution, and the First Amendment to the Constitution says that we're not going to pass a law establishing a religion. Most people refer to that as a separation of church and state. We can't have a religious test for like holding office or things. Well, at the time that was created was approximately the same time that many of the state constitutions were also being created. And if you go read many, if not most, of the state constitution, they would also say, we're not going to have a religious test to hold office, but atheists can't serve on a jury and atheists can't hold public office. Now, we read that today and we'd say, wait a minute, how could a rational person say on one hand, no religious test, but turn around and say atheists can't serve on a jury and can't hold a public office? Well, if you think about it, what they were talking about is, we're not going to have a test to see if your doctrine's right, but somebody that doesn't believe in God, it goes back to this same passage right here. They have to swear where? Before the Lord. And the reason is, I can fool you, but I'm not going to be able to fool God. And if I believe that there is no afterlife, that this material existence is all there is, then ultimately what's keeping me from saying, I'm just going to do what I want, what's best for me. That was the motivation between saying, okay, we're not going to force you into some denomination or even a religion, but if you believe that this life is all there is, then we're going to question whether you're ultimately going to be able to say that you're not just doing things based on what feels good at the moment. And if you look at societies over and over and over again, once you remove religion, once you remove what it's saying right here in this passage, that they have to go before the Lord and make an oath saying that I care about facing my God, once you've removed that from a society, then the societies start to crumble. And that's exactly what's happening to our societies today. We probably should move on here. We'll never finish the Mosaic Law. But if we keep looking at the next one, look at verses 12 to 15. In verses 12 to 15, it says there, if I borrow something from someone, then I'm responsible for it until it's given back. I have to pay it back, even if the animal dies or the animal is stolen. That gives us additional principle, Steve, about, okay, if I borrowed something, I'm responsible for your property. And I have an obligation to you to take care of it because it was yours. We have there this idea that private property is important. And yes, these things get to as profound of a concept of private property rights are important. You've loaned me something, it was yours, I'm responsible for it, and I owe you something if it gets lost or stolen. And so any ideas, Steve? I mean, does this really get into things like socialism and private property?
Well, yes. I mean, another example would be, say that you're going somewhere and you leave your car or your means of transportation with a friend or a neighbor, and you haven't given them permission to drive it. You've just given them permission to look over it and make sure that it's kept safe. And while you're gone, they actually go out and drive it. Then, yeah, there's going to be restitution that they're going to have to pay for because you didn't give them permission. It's your property. You didn't give them permission to drive it, and they didn't keep it safe. Same thing. It's and that goes into, and property rights is something that's a basic in regards to what we look at today. But we also see that through the years that also got muddled through the centuries into where you had this feudal system and property rights were lost in some shape, form, or fashion. But look, even way back here, 1,500 years before Jesus, here are these rules that talk about property rights.
And so the Bible does not teach socialism. It teaches private property rights. So let's move on. Look down at verses 16, and let's go ahead and read that, Steve. If you could just read Exodus 22:16, we're already in a major issue here.
If a man seduces a virgin who is not engaged and lies with her, he must pay a dowry for her to be his wife.
This gets into sexual laws and sexual ethics between men and women and families, and it's dealing with someone who is not married. So if they were pledged to be married or already married, the word that's often used in the Bible is betrothed. Betrothed means engaged. And in this one, again, this is dealing with if a man seduces a virgin who is not engaged. The Bible is very clear, first of all, about what it expects about marriage and sex. And what was one of the 10 commandments was do not what?
Commit adultery.
Do not commit adultery.
And don't covet, even covet your neighbor's wife, and etc.
Right. So don't have greed or lust for your neighbor's wife, and don't commit adultery. And so here it's talking about a virgin that's not engaged or already married. And what it's saying here again is that if a man seduces her, it assumes the man is the initiator here and lies with her, has sex with her, then he must pay a dowry for her to be his wife. And then in verse 17, if her father refuses to give her to him in marriage, that is, he shall pay money equal to the dowry for virgins. The Bible is quite clear that sex is reserved for marriage. And it teaches this over and over again. Our society has convinced ourselves that we're smarter than all that and has pretty well thrown all that out the window. Steve, first of all, before we get into all of the nuances of this, what are the consequences of widespread acceptance of premarital sex? What does that do to us as individuals, and what does that do to a society when rules like this or morals like this, we consider it old-fashioned? What happens to a society when that gets left by the wayside and we just go do what we want?
Well, that's another one of these questions that could lead to many different directions and have many answers. One is it lessens the value of the family, I think. Number two is it lessens the value of a relationship between a man and a wife, both with the man and the girl as well, because the men don't have the respect for the girls and the girls don't have the expectations from the men in regards to their lifestyle and what they're going out for. I mean, I was always taught that, don't date girls unless you think that you might marry them someday. That was kind of the first rule that I was taught and brought up with. But secondary thing is that because if you have rampant, open sexual behavior, then it leads to disease. And we've seen that happen as well. And then the disease goes about through the community, the sexually transmitted disease. Then it also destroys the family from a standpoint of if a child is conceived out of that. So then if the man doesn't, in our society today, the man isn't obligated to marry the woman. Sometimes he has to be forced. She has to take him to court sometimes in order to make him actually pay child support for it. If she doesn't do that, there's many men that they don't even do that. They don't want to take care of it. So the family is at risk, and it just leads to a lot of issues where the society starts to break down.
And what you started with and what you ended with is exactly correct. The family gets affected first, and ultimately society breaks down. We can say this authoritatively because we've seen it happen and are seeing it happen in our culture today. In times past, our culture held to these basic principles that premarital sex was not something that was good, and sex should be reserved for after marriage. That was thrown out a couple of generations ago with people thinking, well, two people should be able to have sex as much as they want. When that happens, once these laws and these morals start to be relaxed, then the next generation always takes it a little further. And what we've seen in our day is that a generation ago, the morals about premarital sex were loosened, and the next generation, we're seeing them abandoned entirely. Now we have, at the time we're time we're making this recording, there's the time of year where they celebrate public sex and have the most extreme, I'm trying to be nice about this, the most extreme acts imaginable in public, in front of children, and celebrate it openly with total nudity and all of the acts that you can imagine, and some you can't, either done in person or simulated. And this was all celebrated with the most degenerate of people imaginable. And so we don't have to say it's a slippery slope fallacy, because we've already slipped down the slope into the mud puddle and are wallowing in the mud like animals. And so this is what happens. How far we've come to where if a man seduces a virgin, then he should marry her, and he should then honor her by taking care of her. That's the motivation here. What ends up happening is the family unit is the basic unit of society. The family unit is the basic unit of society. And once that family unit gets compromised in any way, then society is compromised. And once the family unit gets taken apart, then society is taken apart. And what we're seeing is that our society is falling apart right in front of our eyes. Society is literally degenerating and literally falling apart at the seams. And we have mass problems, mass disease, mass violence, because we've abandoned all of these moral principles.
I think debauchery was the word that you were looking for a while ago. I want to talk about a couple of the subtleties here in this. One is, it says here, if the man seduces the virgin, okay? So the first subtlety is that by him seducing her, it's thought that he has the intention to marry her. That's the intention, because that's what she is assuming as well. This ends up being a consensual relationship or consensual act between the two, because he is seducing her. He's kind of short-circuiting the process of the full marriage vows. But the point being is, that's why it is said there that he's going to marry her and he's going to pay the dowry. That's one thing that's going on here as well. It's a protection for her in regards to that he's just not going to get away with it. The other thing is, because some people, the skeptics again, want to look at this and say, oh, the man is just free to do whatever he wants to and the woman is being punished. No, it's protection for the woman, and it's also for the man. He's now married. Guess what? If he continues his seductive ways, he's married. So then what law is he violating? Adultery. And so there's a penalty for that, because now he's a married man that's out seducing somebody else. All these laws are one unit. Once you break one law, you break all of them, which then makes them not in a right standing or a right relationship with God.
Right.
And so this is the backdrop that is going on. This is a nation that's being set apart to worship God and to live by the standards that he's putting here. It's easy for us to sit in our day, thousands of years later, in a society that is completely different and just like what you described, and look back on this under that lens and say, oh, how cruel this is. No. It's not cruel. It's taking care of the woman, and it's also putting the man under responsibility. He did something that he shouldn't have done. Guess what? Now you need to be a responsible man. Now you have a family.
And in our day, we allow these things, and then the man runs off because he's not responsible, and the one that ends up getting hurt, it's always the weaker people, the poorer people, and the women who end up being taken advantage of. And that's why societies have always tried to protect women, to keep them from being taken advantage of, because they're the ones that end up poor and downtrodden. There's actually more to this. We're probably going to have to stop here for today. We'll give a teaser for next time, which is, there's been an accusation in our day from skeptics and atheists, is, does the Bible teach that a man rapes a woman, that she has to marry her rapist, which is a terrible accusation. And there's some passages over in Deuteronomy that are parallel to this one here. So if you come back with us next time, We'll answer this question, does the Bible teach that a woman has to marry a rapist? We'll deal with that next time. And these other laws here that are designed to protect society, we'll deal with all that as we reason through the Bible next time. And we trust that you'll be here with us to do so as well.
Thank you so much for watching and listening, and may God bless you.